Thank you for the opportunity, committee members. It's lovely to be here and to provide a bit of an outline of who the National Transport Research Organisation is, what we do and who we serve in Australia, and our views about the opportunities for the future to make change. So we were founded in 1960 as the Australian Road Research Board and have been operating continuously since 1960. We're an institution in this country. We're owned by the state transport agencies of the Commonwealth of Australia. The Australian Local Government Association is our ownership structure. They're our shareholders. We receive no grant funding at all, not a single dollar in grant funding from any organisation in Australia. All of the work that we do is fee-for-service, so contract work, delivering research outcomes. That's the model that we have today. It wasn't the model we had back in 1960. We were centrally funded back in 1960. So we have 230 staff. We operate in Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. Melbourne is headquarters, and a big research laboratory in Port Melbourne, brand new facility that was opened by the Deputy Prime Minister in 2018, Mr McCormack. It's just a world-class, world-leading facility, and for those who have been there, we recently had Senator the Honourable Carol Brown down for a visit, and she just was blown away with the facility. I know Mr Buchholz has been down and had a look at the facility. It's just magnificent, world-class in Victoria, in Port Melbourne in Victoria. Yeah. So 5 years ago we began the transformation to be a transport organisation. Our shareholding members are all now transport organisations, not main roads entities anymore. So we now formally launched NTRO on the 6th of December last year. Road, rail, ports, airports. The integration of the transport journey is the one that we're on. There are 4 key topic areas that I'd just like to quickly touch on and then answer your questions. The first is, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. We currently collect all of the data in every state and territory in Australia on the performance of the state and federal highway networks. So we've got the complete data set. So I can tell you exactly the roughest roads, the smoothest roads, the safest roads. We've got all of the data overlay of speed with respect to posted speed, the potholes, the rutting, the cracking. We've got all of the performance data on the entire national state road system, on the entire national highway system. The big gap is local government. 80% of our road network's local government. They don't have the financial capacity to get measurement done in a consistent, uniform and reliable way to inform their asset management plans to allow them to know what priority, right treatment, right place, right time. There's enormous savings in being able to answer those questions. And just by way of example, Queensland's a lead state in this country in the way in which it measures its infrastructure and delivers asset management outcomes. So we've been measuring for 8 years, every single year, the complete performance of the Queensland road system, 33,000 kilometres. And now Neil Scales, who's the Chief Executive of Transport and Main Roads, has taken $1 billion out of the future maintenance program because he now knows right treatment, right time, right place. It's a remarkable case study in delivering BCRs and knowledge through data. Second area I wanted to quickly talk about is next generation materials. We've spent the last 4 years really zoomed in and focused on recycled product, the incorporation of recycled product into roads. How do we make them more resilient? Ahead of the questions that you're now seeking answers to, because that's our job. The National Transport Research Organisation's job is to be 2 steps ahead so that when agencies are ready to move in this path, we have the answers for them. So we've written specifications in most states now for the use of chrome rubber in bitumen seals and in asphalt pavements. It's a fantastic product. It's chrome tyre rubber, so it's a recycled product. It adds cracking resistance, so it's a longer lasting, more resilient product at a very marginal cost increase. So the whole of life it's cheaper. We've done crushed glass as a replacement for bedding sand. So instead of digging sand out of creek beds, you can use crushed glass, recycled crushed glass as a product. We've done the work on plastics. There's not really a pathway for plastics in the road environment, we don't believe. It's not a sensible, practical or commercially viable product. We've just recently completed a piece of work for Paintback, who collect recycled paint from the industry, and they sponsored us to do a research and development program where you can incorporate now recycled paint into granular materials. It acts as a binding agent. So it reduces the number of times you need to grade the road and smooth the road. Most of our network, more than 50% of our network, is unsealed roads in Australia. So it's a massive opportunity. We've done crushed concrete, we've done building and demolition waste, predominantly used in embankment materials and sub-base materials in the lower layers of road structures, and recycled asphalts. So when we dig up and mill up our asphalt materials, the taxpayers have already paid for that product once. You can incorporate it back in, 100% of it back into new asphalt products with rejuvenating agents and the science and the rigour to support it. So there's lots of opportunity in all of those spaces for local government, state government, territory governments to really advance their standards and deliver better next generation materials. In the field of new maintenance approaches and this building of a new resilient road infrastructure network for Australia, we are at this amazing confluence, the confluence of transport, technology and energy in Australia. And we've got this overlay of a changing environment and severe weather events. 1 in 300, 1 in 250-year events, just unheard of, are now, we've had 4 or 5 of those in the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah. New Zealand's just experienced 2 in Auckland within about 3 weeks of each other, 2 by 250-year events. It's quite extraordinary. We service New Zealand as well. So what does that mean then? So how do we deliver better levels of resilience? Well, I talk about water being the kryptonite to roads. The most important thing is to keep water out of our road structures. So we need to fundamentally redesign and reimagine the way in which our roads are designed. We've got to remove all the clay shoulders that have traditionally been part of designs and what we call daylight roads now, so that the granular materials have got daylight on the outer side so that the water can escape if they get in the top. We've got to incorporate foam bitumen stabilisation in granular pavements where they're in water susceptible areas, and the best example of that is Transport for New South Wales on the Newell Highway. So the Newell Highway, they've just recently built 30 kilometres of bitumen treated base. The Newell 7 years ago was out for about 72 days as a consequence of flooding. Well, you can't have one of the major economic arteries of the country out. So they're rebuilding much more resilient pavements now at a fraction of the cost of full depth asphalt, because you can't build full depth asphalt in rural and regional Australia. A, it's too expensive and you don't have the materials, and you've got to work with the local materials. So there's a whole suite of solutions. So wider formations, full width shoulder sealing, stabilising your materials, geofabric and geotextile seals, bitumen treated bases, foam bases. The use of those products is really quite sporadic across Australia. And it's sporadic for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's not the guides to support the implementation and the use, and there's not the knowledge transfer, particularly into local government, for their availability, because they always follow the states. And if the states aren't using next generation technology, it doesn't filter through. The last area is the decarbonisation overlay. What is really important, and we've done just an enormous amount of work in this space, is as we're building back in a more resilient way, using different products, we must put a decarbonisation overlay on it. And I say to the Chief Executive Group, who are my board members, the ministers will be asking you, what have you done about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from everything you do in the whole life cycle of building a road, maintaining a road, capital works of a road? What is that life cycle and what are you saving and how are you doing it? So we built a cloud-based tool funded by the Queensland Transport and Main Roads and Western Australian Main Roads, which is now a national platform of a tool for sustainability assessment. So you put in your model design and then you say, all right, well, that top 40 millimetres of asphalt, what if we replaced it with recycled asphalt and a crumb rubber binder? What's the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? What are the BCRs and what's the ultimate economic outcome? We've done all of that work now. So we now have a platform in those 2 states for both industry and state to measure, and we're trying to get the other states to actually get their minds focused on doing the same thing. Industry loves it because it's a level playing field. So that's the sort of breadth of what we do as a business. We are the one source of truth for the science and the rigour in this space in Australia and New Zealand. We've got some wonderfully talented people through the business. We are a global organisation. We've got about 100 nationalities represented in the business. And the transformation over the last 6 years has been quite remarkable. We're very diverse now. We had 19% women 6 years ago. We've got 40% women in the business now. I've taken about 10 years out of the median age of the business, and we are globally connected. So we've got partners now. We're one of 7 global research laboratory partnerships.
Did you say you got 100 nationalities?
Yeah.
Out of
230 people. Correct.
30 people?
Correct.
That's extraordinary.
It's remarkable. And just fantastic people. 50 PhDs in the business. So we have more qualified doctors in a science and materials engineering than all of the universities in Australia put together in the pavement engineering space. But that was our role. Since 1960, that's been our role to fulfil that space.
So you mentioned the chapters before. Who did we have giving the evidence at the last? Ausroads. They said they'd updated their chapter on hydrology recently or something. Is that based on your information to them?
Yeah, we write most of the Austroads technical reports.
Right.
So they're a publishing house. They receive funding from the states and the Commonwealth and release projects to market. We do most of the technical work and write most of the guides.
Right.
But they're for state governments. We've written this suite of guides, funded by the Commonwealth actually. Back in 2019, we wrote those guides for local government. And we've put a budget bit in this year to write the next suite of 4 for local government, to give them the basis and the confidence to do new things. And the first one is on safety and the second one's on recycled pavements in the next suite of guides for local government.
Okay. And they're more directed at state governments?
These are local government guides. Austroads are focused on state government outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries. I might let everyone else. We'll go to the Deputy Chair, but then you're next, Colin.
Thank you. Mr Caltabiano, I've got 2 lines of questioning. The second relates to local government, the first relates to data. You said that your effectively shareholder members are the relevant departmental state and federal departments. You also said that the Queensland presumably department is the standout and that you were fee for service. So I take from your evidence that the Queensland government invests heavily in undertaking these data capture exercises, which I think are your cars and trucks and buses that drive the road. Who owns the IP, the data? That's the first question. And is it publicly shared? Is it open source? And so if you can answer those questions for me in terms of the data, I'd appreciate that, and then I'll come to local government in a minute.
So we have a suite of vehicles that traverse the country and collect the network. The flagship,
materials you provided us.
Correct.
We've seen.
Flagship of the fleet's a big semi-trailer called the Intelligent Pavement Assessment Vehicle.
Yeah.
It travels at 80 kilometres an hour and picks up the strength of the pavement, cracking, rutting profile, all without traffic control. So yes, we do that annually for Queensland. We've done it every year for 8 years. And in fact, they've just invested in the next generation of technology, which is picking up both inner wheel path, outer wheel path, ground penetrating radar down to a metre, so they can see moisture profile.
But the quality of that data is determined by how heavily relative states lean into the funding piece, because
correct. Yeah,
it's a fee for service.
They've got to pay for it.
Yeah.
So your question around...
and then who owns the data?
Yeah, so your question around funding is they are our most significant funding partner, and we have a 5-year agreement with them, which is fantastic. Yeah. They own the data. We have royalties over the use of the data for research purposes, development purposes, and commercial purposes.
Yeah. So when others say to me, the data exists, but sharing it and publishing it are 2 different things. So, for example, the AAA, as you know, is on a campaign to get the Commonwealth to force or encourage or strong arm, whatever the word is, the states to share that data. It's really a situation that they hold that data. If they engage with you to collect the data through your technical skill, they own the data. Yes. And so releasing it's not a question for the NTRO, it's a question for the respective shareholder states for whom that data is collected. That's why they pay you the fee, to give them the data, they've got it.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Good.
But there is a, if I might, there's
Sure.
a broader opportunity there, because each of the states gets the data processed in a different way.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Standardising the data is a whole other discussion.
Well, we do standardise the
Well,
data.
you do.
We collect it in a standard way. We
Right.
process it in a way in which each of the states
Request it. Yeah.
If the Commonwealth were to ask us
Prescribe.
to process the data in a uniform way, we would just write to our shareholders and say, for research purposes, can we, well, we've got as a right use of the data for research purposes, can we now reprocess it in a standard way? Then we can.
Mr. Caltabiano, can I ask you on notice to write to us about what mechanism the Commonwealth could use to achieve that outcome? Because I think that would be a great recommendation, potentially. I'm just trying to assist the Secretary. Can I then move to my local government question, which is this. 880,000 kilometres of the road network in Australia, 600 plus thousand of that is in the hands of local government. Now, we've seen your flagship truck, but you also, I've seen, I think, either Prados or
All the standard vehicles.
yeah, or standard vehicles that work on the unsealed road network, etc., etc. Firstly, what percentage of that 600,000 kilometres is serviced in the same way? There's the data collected from. Presumably councils have to ask you to do that, pay for you to do that. And would there be a mechanism whereby, or what's preventing more of that from occurring? Is it resources? And could the Commonwealth think about leaning in and supporting local government to get more of that data collected and managed so that local government could follow the lead of Queensland, who I think you told me is saving $1 billion by making the right decisions for the right treatment at the right time?
Yeah. So who uses the data in local government? We work for probably about 40 local governments of the 357 of them across the country at the moment, in a whole range of states.
Sure.
So it's not one state does more than any other state. We have been pursuing partnerships, and we have a new partnership with the West Australian Local Government Association. So we've got our big truck doing the wheat belt in Western Australia right now, 4,500 kilometres of the wheat belt, because they want it. We did it in 2019. We're doing another snapshot in 2023, so that they can map the deterioration of the network and then relate that back to an economic cost of delivering goods to port. Really important.
Beef roads,
people would know in the big states. Super important. So
industry groups can petition effectively state governments to actually do that work, presumably. They can't
they can fund it.
They can't come to you direct. They can come to you direct.
Yeah, we work. We do a lot of work for the private sector.
Right.
So we work for all the big contractors,
Right.
CPB, Lend-Lease, BMD, all the big contractors on their networks, and we've done a lot of handover assessment. So Toowoomba Second Range Crossing, before it was handed over from the contractor to the maintenance contractor, we did the assessment on the condition of the network. So that's who uses us. And there's some really good case studies. So Bundaberg City Council in Queensland, a brilliant case study where they got us in, they've remapped their entire way of doing asset management in that council and now delivering some really great outcomes. Goulburn City Council in middle of New South Wales, just outside Canberra, another great example. The councils in the west of Victoria, Ararat got the iPave in, so it's one of the only local governments in Australia that's used iPave. Brilliant outcomes for them and insight into the treatment of the road. So it is available. It is a step change for local government and cost. And local government.
Can you unpack that for me so
Sure.
I know in real
Yep. So
layperson's terms?
So local government operate, and there's no such thing as local government to it. 357. I talk to our teams about there's rural local government, regional local government, urban local government, and the smaller local governments with minimised staffing and resources use a clipboard and a piece of paper and drive the road and make notes.
What happens in my council?
And that's perfectly okay. That's what you can afford. That's what you can afford. What we are now talking to are the regional groupings of local government. So in Queensland, they've got regional road groups, and getting the regions together to work out what the priority and interconnectors and the important community connectivity piece and economic connectivity piece is really important. So from a pencil and paper through to the use of sophistication is in order of dollars per lane kilometre is how we measure, sort of $10 a lane kilometre to about $60 a lane kilometre. So that's the sort of bandwidth.
There's a need for someone to fund that shortfall,
or
a partnership to do it.
And we've been having those conversations with the states to try to lift the information going into local government. We talked extensively with the Victorian government to change the model, and I think Minister Allen is having a really serious look now at, particularly post-flooding, how we can assist local government with the information to deliver different asset outcomes, because they just can't afford to do it themselves. So if the state paid for the collection of the data, and then our assets teams can come in and help them rewrite their asset plans, it will all pay for itself.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's a real cash flow problem, isn't it? You need the cash up front to achieve the savings at the back end.
Yes.
In the interest of time, we'll just go to Colin.
Thank you for coming, sir. And just a quick comment, I have been to your facility several years ago in Melbourne, and I recommend the committee, if nobody's been there, go and see it. It's well worth seeing with the work you do in respect to pavement and so forth. So to your key recommendations, two questions, point 6 and point 4. I'll start with point 6. So incentivise the introduction of mobile mixed processing plant availability to regional areas. So having sat on main roads in Queensland, I was wondering whether you are aware that mobile crushing plants and that sort of equipment is caught up in industrial manslaughter legislation, so much so that CEOs and those people will not now use that equipment because they become personally responsible under that legislation. And what has happened in practical terms is that many local governments now don't use a mobile crusher where they can take that machinery out to a site and process road base and material that they use for a road, and that's added substantial cost now to the transport of road base material, etc., to a job. So that is an anomaly that needs to be addressed, which was caught up in the legislation pretty much by accident, I think, but that's something that you need to understand exactly what that equipment and what sort of equipment gets caught up in that industrial manslaughter legislation, and how it affects the CEOs, because they can now personally be held responsible under that legislation. So my first question, are you aware of that?
Well, we don't deal with the industrial legislative side.
I know that.
Yes, I'm aware. Our job as a scientific group is to say we think the best solution is the most local solution. Yeah, it's the most cost-effective solution. And in fact, we receive in our Port Melbourne laboratories marginal materials from all over Australia. So we've got a testing facility at the back of our Port Melbourne office. It's a full heavy-duty wheel that we build 1/2 a tonne of material samples from rural and regional Australia, where we test them and see how they perform under a rolling wheel. And it is marginal materials. It's the sand from that creek bed. It's the borrow pit from that side of the road. How do we provide a grading and a moisture content that delivers the best outcome? Because what's happened in Australia is we've lost a whole generation of expertise. People of my age and older are exiting the business really quickly at the moment, and there's no expertise coming to follow through of, I knew 3 scoops of that borrow pit and 1 scoop of sand, I blended up, put 3% moisture in, will work. And it's worked for 60 years. It's gone. So we've now built a scientific way of proving that and doing that, and we just get pallets and pallets of material through our Port Melbourne laboratory to do that, because the trucking costs are killing road rehabilitation programs, particularly for local government.
So that is exactly the point. But anyway, in the interest of time, point number 4, address the disproportionate burdens towards best practice adoption faced by regional and rural remote communities. So obviously you've said 80% of the road infrastructure is managed by local government. So I guess my question to you is, how in practical terms do you think government can assist local government? Because at the end of the day, it's all about money and cost.
Well, there's a number of means, and that is the nub of the problem. How do we assist local communities in those local areas to solve these problems? So one of the tools that we developed is the guide process. where we need to roll out this educational material and the new knowledge that we've developed over here in a research environment to relate. These are written so that a supervisor can read them. These are not high-order technical documents that we produce for Austroads, which is your engineering groups. This is a supervisor can pick this up and go, what do I do if I've got this problem? So we need to continue to develop those suite of solutions. We have taken it on ourselves to get out and start to do seminars and work with local communities to transfer knowledge on how to build roads again. In fact, again, in Victoria, the Major Road Projects Victoria have just engaged us to write 21 programs of work of how to build a road, what good looks like, because they've acknowledged that the building standards and the quality of construction isn't what it needs to be to build long-lasting, resilient roads for the future. Well, if that's happening in urban Melbourne, you can imagine the dearth of skills in rural and regional Australia. It's real, and I hear it at the Australian Local Government Association conferences. The one last year in Canberra, I had mayors coming up to me all day for 3 days, talking to me about how can we get your skill sets out there, and they just love the opportunity. But it's also dealing with those local materials. We've got to have that flow of local materials in local areas solving local problems.
The barriers for local governments in adopting those great recycled materials that you mentioned before?
There's a couple of barriers to local government moving down the path of recycled and more resilient infrastructure. The first is standards. They don't have the suite of standards to put in a tender document to ask the private sector to deliver the outcomes. And they can't and are resistant to adopting state standards because they're often at a higher level than you need for local government roads, and you don't want to be paying for a state standard on local roads that perform a different function. And if you were to have 357 standards across Australia, you would have difficulties. What we've done in Victoria is we've written a local government standard for Victoria for crumb rubber in asphalts.
What rubber, sorry?
Crumb rubber in asphalts, so recycled crumb rubber in asphalts. So all local governments in Victoria have got access to that local government standard. And it ideally should be done region by region. Victoria's small enough to be a region. New South Wales is probably 2 regions. Queensland certainly 3 or 4, and Western Australia is 3 or 4. South Australia is 2. Because the regional impacts are really important when you're dealing with naturally occurring materials and recycled product. They've got to be fit for purpose for the
humidity,
geological and geographical locations in Australia. But there's not a lot. You're talking about a dozen or so different regions across Australia. Yeah. It's not a big leap to give them the standards that they need to enable so that's the first barrier.
Is it a function of latitude, the amount of moisture in the area? That's not really a thing.
It's a function of climatic, so west of the range, east of the range in the eastern states, and north-south in the southern states has a big impact, but also the materials in existence, so the naturally occurring granular materials, what you can do with them varies because they've got different clay contents, different rock types. And it's got to be fit for purpose. You can't just say unilaterally, well, we're going to do treatment X. It just won't work. So we really need to have that science and rigour to deliver the outcomes. So first barrier is specification. Second barrier then is taking the construction sector on the journey, particularly in regional Australia, where you've got a lot of small second-tier contractors. They need to be taken on the journey as well. It's not just a matter of writing a specification in a document. You need to do a pilot where all of the contractors can learn and deliver those on a regional basis, not just by a council, but on a regional basis, have these pilots operating so that the private sector can build some of this infrastructure using new materials and then demonstrate that it's fit for purpose in those places and they've got the skill sets and the teams to deliver them. And that's it, really. We can just get on with it after that.
Great, thanks. Tracy, did you have any questions at all?
Just an observation, if I may, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for your knowledge and wisdom. And notice you obviously with the ARRB, which is that flow of information coming through. I'm local government. My background is local government, and I was really pleased to hear that the West Australian Local Government Association are actually on board, and I'm the immediate past president, so I was like, yes. One of the things that I did want to ask, and a lot of local government questions have already been asked, so I don't need to ask them again, is the Australian Local Government Association. You're talking about the standards and the barriers and so on with local governments across the country, and we all know there's such a diversity. They have their annual conference, so you obviously have a presence there.
Yes, we do.
But are you speaking? Are you presenting this year? Or because I think this is something that needs to be well and truly out there for you've got a captive audience effectively.
Yes. No, we definitely are in attendance. We didn't speak, I didn't speak last year, but I'm seeking to speak this year at the June conference here again in Canberra. But I am in attendance for the full time, myself as CEO of the business, talking to councillors and chief executives particularly, walking them through what is available, because often they don't realise what's available.
Exactly.
And when the elected members see what's available, they drive change through those organisations.
And it's in having that voice and being right across all of the different local governments right across the country. So I know that the President, Linda Scott, is around the corridors today, so hopefully either bump into her. If not, I'd make an appointment ASAP to see if you can get on that presenting, because I think that would be very helpful for local governments.
Yeah. Now, we're very focused on them because they have the biggest networks. They are the least well-resourced, so every dollar is absolutely critical to be spent in a value for money way. And it's often different outcomes. It's often the community connectivity as opposed to the freight task that's more important in different parts of their jurisdictions. So it's understanding what problem they're really trying to solve is as important as being way out here as an engineer solving problems that may not be relevant. So we've now built teams right across the country to be really focused on understanding what problem we're trying to solve, and it varies depending on the entity that we're working for. So we've got some really skilled people in the business to partner in that space.
And if you were going to be resourced by the Commonwealth to do something to assist local government, where would you allocate those funds?
We would deliver what the Commonwealth required out of our hubbed offices all over Australia. So we've got a resource base, 230 people. We've got a resource base to be able to do that now. We've got experts in every state and Canberra, not Darwin yet.
Would it be worth having someone in Darwin?
It will be, actually. That's why I'm going. One of the reasons for going, I'm meeting with Andrew Kirkman and Louise McCormack and the team in the department, because we have built up a flow of work in the NT, 500,000 or so a year of flow of work. We think that the opportunity to translate, the smaller jurisdictions get all the benefit from an organisation like us from the funding that the big jurisdictions put in. And that's one of the beauties of the Federation, and that's why they're part of it. And in fact, the NT are leading the country in the safety space, in building safer infrastructure. We did a piece of work for them about 12, 18 months ago, which has shaped a new tool called NetRisk 2, which Assistant Minister Brown talks about now everywhere she goes, because we've demonstrated it to her, where if you're doing some maintenance, for example, and you're widening your shoulders, putting an extra seal on, do you go back with a wide centre line? Do you put audio tactile lines on the edges? Because it lifts your star rating and reduces your factors of safety and changes the safer outcome of the network. We've got to achieve 50% reduction in deaths on the network by 2030. It's all going in the wrong direction at the moment. We've got to step change it. So giving engineers a tool that they can overlay their maintenance and capital works programs, so that when ministers ask the question, I'm putting 2.2 billion into road safety, you tell me what the star rating increase has been, the safer network outcomes have been. Well, there's now a tool to measure it. And you force engineers to think, well, every time I go out and touch the network, how do I improve safety? What if I put these things on? So that's
What's that tool called again?
NetRisk 2. We'll send you a brief on it. And we've shown Minister Brown in our office in Melbourne when she was there a couple of weeks ago. We did a full demonstration for her, picking a link, showing what the safety issues are on the link, what the standard treatment is. Then if you modified those treatments, how you can step change the star rating of your road system, so that you're maximising your investment. It's not just about building roads that are more resilient and engineeringly sound, but actually putting a safety overlay at the same time. It doesn't cost you any more if you do it at the same time.
Can I round out by asking this question, Mr. Caltabiano? Anecdotally, the evidence into this building at the moment is a wetter than usual winter and summer period has resulted in a deterioration, an expedited deterioration of our national road network. Are you able to say whether that is showing up in the data, or is it too early, or is there early indicators of that in terms of the work you're doing?
A really pointed question, Mr. Passon, absolutely correct. Yes, it has had a noticeable impact. No, we can't give you the data yet. We have just finished measuring.
But are you seeing signs of it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yes,
that's
clearly.
what I'm asking for.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
So we've just done the flood recovery for northern New South Wales, and we've just completed the northern Victorian work. So Victoria's run the IPAVE, next generation IPAVE, and it is complete literally this week. So our assets teams now go in and go, well, we measured this road in 2019, 2020. We've measured it now in 2023 after 3 years of wet weather and a horrendous flooding environment. We can see what the we can now tell you actually what the delta is, what the change in whole of life is, what the reduction in strength is, the increase in cracking.
And I appreciate you can't release that information publicly or like granularly, but will you be able to release something that talks about, in general terms, what's happened to the road network as a result of those rain events?
We will be, because we're working with the Department of Transport and Planning in Victoria, and they're very keen to make it public. So we've got an international conference in October in our building in Port Melbourne, and it will be one of the key feature papers.
Right.
Because
can I ask if it's available in time before we report? I'd appreciate receiving a copy of it, because it goes to the heart of what we're talking about. You started by saying that water is kryptonite for roads.
Yep.
The point is we've been inundated with kryptonite, and I'm very concerned not only about the damage that we can see, but of course the damage we can't see. That will reveal itself over time.
Yeah, and I will have a discussion with the DTP colleagues in Victoria, and they're very keen to make sure that this information
It's in their
is
best
public.
interest, presumably, because
Well, they'll be
80 or
presenting.
50% of that funding needs to come from here.
Correct.
Thank you so much for your attendance here today. If you've been asked, and on a couple of occasions you've offered to provide additional information, so if it can be done, please forward it to the Secretary by 24th March. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript from today of the evidence, and we'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Thanks again for your time. Look forward to getting down to Port Melbourne at some point to have a look at your facility, and I declare this public hearing closed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks so much for your time.